Greetings, everyone. Here are the latest analyses of important developments today. Ryazan firestorm, Ukraine's superweapon, destroyed the energy circuit right next to the bridge. A coordinated bombing campaign of unprecedented scale has just struck directly at the economic lifeline of the Kremlin, turning Russia's symbolic oil refinery into a living hell. What secrets lie behind these beasts possessing destructive power that force Russian leaders to hide in bunkers? The shocking truth is revealed, a trigger for the propaganda machine to accuse Ukraine. The disaster of Russian military equipment? Was this a terrible military accident caused by outdated weapons, or a cruel staged scenario traded for the lives of Russian citizens to serve the political scheme of Russia's collapse and the unusual military movements from the Belarusian border? Kyiv's kinetic strikes have officially tightened the oil supply lifeline, causing Russia's energy output to plummet to a record low after nearly 2 decades. But amid the backdrop of a Russia in flames, the reckless military moves of dictator Alexander Lukashenko are signaling a looming geopolitical shadow about to descend brutally onto the battlefield. Here is the content and detailed analysis. When Putin was shocked by the Ryazan firestorm, which destroyed many costly military assets from Yeysk to Crimea. Ladies and gentlemen, the situation in Ukraine has once again been pushed to an extreme level of tension after one of the most devastating airstrike campaigns ever launched by the Kremlin on the capital, Kyiv. May 14th became a horrifying memory when a wave of fierce bombings claimed the lives of at least 24 innocent people and left nearly 50 others injured. From an expert's perspective, this is not just an ordinary military attack, but a deliberate act of escalating violence targeting civilian objectives. The Kremlin mobilized a massive arsenal of 56 various types of missiles and up to 675 drones to carry out its scheme to paralyze the will to resist. Kyiv's air defense forces operated at full capacity during a sleepless night, successfully intercepting most of the threats, with 652 drones shot down along with 29 Kh-101 cruise missiles and 12 Iskander ballistic missiles, as well as missiles from S-400 systems. Let's analyze the tactics. The Russian military's conversion and use of S-400 air defense systems as ground attack weapons in the capital, Kyiv, is clear evidence of a severe shortage of long-range precision-guided munitions in their strategic reserves. However, despite the defense forces' extraordinary efforts, some brutal missiles still penetrated the shield. The aftermath is a shocking scene of devastation. About 11 apartment buildings in Kyiv collapsed completely, and more than 50 other civilian structures across Ukraine were severely damaged. In the ruins along the banks of the Dnipro River, rescue forces raced against time to search for late signs of life beneath the rubble. But miracles did not happen for everyone. Among the cold bodies that were brought out were 3 innocent children, with the youngest victim being a girl who had just turned 12 years old. This event immediately triggered a wave of deep outrage from the Ukrainian High Military Command, laying the foundation for a lightning counteroffensive campaign that was planned even before the alarm sirens had stopped sounding. On the diplomatic front, Kyiv immediately took strong legal actions to expose war crimes before the international community. Ukrainian Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha officially requested an emergency meeting at the United Nations Security Council, while also calling on international forums to unanimously speak out against the massacres of civilians and humanitarian workers by Russia. However, these parliamentary efforts may not be able to change the situation, as Russia has accepted a fully confrontational stance against international law to pursue its goals. More notably, President Volodymyr Zelensky provided solid evidence to Western partners. Fragments from the Kh-101 cruise missile that struck a residential area in Kyiv showed that it had just been manufactured in the second quarter of 2026. This is a direct slap in the face to the effectiveness of economic sanctions, proving that Russia still finds loopholes to access high-tech components for its war machine. When sanctions on paper prove powerless to cut off the enemy's flow of weapons, Ukraine understands that it must activate another weapon, kinetic retaliation with real firepower. The supreme order from the Ukrainian leader was issued. The military must immediately develop the most proportionate and devastating response scenarios to make Russia pay the price. Kyiv's answer did not keep the enemy waiting long. On May 15th, Ukraine launched an unprecedented large-scale long-range missile barrage deep into Russian Federation territory. Unlike the tactic of conducting airstrikes on civilian targets, Ukraine's counteroffensive strategy focuses on precise surgical strikes against key infrastructure, energy, and core military facilities to break the enemy's ability to sustain the war. The target selected this time is highly strategic. Ryazan province. The Ryazan oil refinery is about 450 kilometers from the border of Ukraine's Sumy province and only about 180 kilometers southeast of the capital, Moscow. The massive Ryazan oil refinery is one of Russia's biggest energy assets, with a peak capacity exceeding 17.1 million tons of crude oil per year. Ryazan is the lifeline that supplies gasoline and diesel directly to the Russian military vehicles fighting in Ukraine. It's also a moneymaker that helps the Kremlin earn foreign currency from countries buying cheap oil products despite sanctions. Destroying this key energy asset is not only a fitting act of revenge for the losses in Kyiv, but also a tactical move to break the Russian war machine. The shocking images shared by the independent media channel Sile Exilinova captured the full brutality of this raid. Footage from the scene showed massive fireballs tearing through the night, turning the Ryazan refinery complex into a living hell. Thick black columns of smoke rose densely into the sky, swallowing the surroundings and turning the fiery sky pitch black. According to reports from local residents, a series of deafening explosions began to erupt at dawn in the area of the plant. When the operation ended, dozens of intense secondary explosions shook various parts of the city, signaling a catastrophic loss for the Russian Federation's war economy. Revealing the Russian media strategy and air defense paradox. Immediately after the fire broke out, the Kremlin quickly activated its media machine to accuse Ukraine of not only targeting industrial infrastructure, but also carrying out a large-scale terrorist attack. This is a desperate diplomatic effort by Moscow to equate Kyiv's retaliatory campaign with the tragedies that the Russian military itself has inflicted on the Ukrainian capital. However, actual facts from the battlefield reveal a completely opposite truth. Many loud explosions continued to echo at the Ryazan oil refinery complex for hours after the initial bombardment. Military analysts believe this phenomenon proves that Kyiv has deployed a continuous, well-coordinated wave of unmanned aerial vehicles. Intense secondary explosions from the initial strike triggered uncontrollable chain reactions at the strategic fuel storage tanks. On independent media like Supernova, combined with video footage capturing the moment a Ukrainian drone streaked across the skies over Ryazan, it partly revealed the intensity of the battle. The buzzing sound of the engine as the drone heads straight toward its target, even though Russian anti-aircraft crews frantically fired, creating streaks of light across the sky, not a single bullet could reach the target. This drone is just one of many spearheads launched by Ukraine onto the battlefield to make Moscow pay for the civilian losses in Kyiv, and many of them have hit their targets perfectly. The paradox of air defense. The reality on the battlefield shows that Russia's point defense systems are revealing major weaknesses against Ukraine's long-range swarm attack tactics, leading to panicked reactions from the stationed forces. When losses can't be hidden, Russian officials respond with a familiar script. The governor of the Ryazan region, Mr. Pablo Manco, quickly announced that debris from an intercepted drone had fallen on an unidentified business in the area. However, the massive fireballs lighting up a corner of the sky turned the excuse about harmless debris into a bitterly ironic joke. Not stopping there, Mr. Manco went on to make a serious accusation in an attempt to change the nature of the incident. 3 Russian civilians were killed and 12 others were injured when this debris struck apartment buildings, implying that the Ryazan oil refinery was not Ukraine's only target. To make their case more convincing, the Russian side even released videos showing residential buildings engulfed in flames with large holes in their structures. However, the Kremlin's propaganda and distortion of the truth completely collapsed due to undeniable evidence that appeared in actual video recordings. Right in the first few seconds of the footage, it is clear that there was no presence of any Ukrainian drones in the residential area. Instead, it was a Russian Panzer air defense system in a panicked attempt to intercept that fired directly at its own apartment building. A terrifying explosion rang out. Car alarms blared throughout the night, and a corner of the building collapsed, creating a tragic scene. From a geopolitical perspective, this event raises major questions. How could a modern Panzer system mistake a massive building for a moving target? Or is this a clumsily staged scenario intended to accuse the other side and justify further attacks on civilians? Whatever the reason, the bitter reality is that Russia's air defense fire is becoming a greater threat to its own people than to Ukrainian equipment. The campaign around Ryazan has demonstrated an important strategic shift by Kyiv. They are fully capable of delivering painful blows to the opponent's economic lifelines without resorting to terrorist attacks on civilians, as Moscow is doing. Commenting on this development, Ms. Hanna, director of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Program at the Eurasian Non-Proliferation Research Center, told the Zaki Independent that Ukraine now possesses the ability to inflict deep damage on Russia in an unprecedented way, and this capability will be a permanent, unresolvable threat to the Kremlin. In fact, the strategic Ryazan oil refinery is not a new target, as it has been attacked by Ukraine several times in the past, most recently in December 2025. That late-year attack was the 9th successful strike targeting this facility in 2025 alone. It followed a previous campaign in November that completely paralyzed the entire production line at the facility. The question is, what made this campaign so unexpected and groundbreaking? The answer comes down to two main factors: the new weaponry's destructive power and the massive scale of the drone swarm. While the fire at Ryazan had yet to be contained, another strike force from Ukraine's long-range arsenal was already targeting China. The question is, what comes next? The appearance of the drone swarm forced Mayor Sergei Sobyanin to quickly issue a statement to reassure the public that the capital's air defenses had shot down 5 Ukrainian drones. However, on other fronts in the conflict, luck did not smile on the Russian army, as their defense systems were completely powerless and collapsed under Ukraine's overwhelming firepower. Discussing Ukraine's layered firepower and air defense strategy. Ukraine's lightning counteroffensive did not stop at the boundaries of energy facilities, but quickly turned into a multifaceted bombing campaign, spreading across many strategic locations. In the port city of Day, on the shores of the Azov Sea, Kyiv's long-range drone squadrons carried out a precise surgical strike, completely destroying a giant Beriev B-200 amphibious aircraft and a K-27 anti-submarine helicopter belonging to the Russian Navy. The destruction of the Beriev B-200 was a calculated and highly devious move. Russia originally used this special amphibious aircraft for large-scale firefighting missions. By eliminating Moscow's long-range firefighting shield, they proactively cut off the opponent's ability to respond to disasters, paving the way for further incendiary attacks on military and logistical facilities without worrying about them being extinguished. Reports from the battlefield. However, along with deep strikes into Russian territory, the front lines in the occupied regions have also witnessed the collapse of the Kremlin's air defense network. On the Luhansk front, Russia's most advanced Tor M2 short-range air defense system has been completely destroyed. A similar scenario also occurred on the strategic Crimea land, when another Panzer S-1 missile and gun air defense system was destroyed under Ukrainian fire. Eliminating these eyes not only helps people in nearby areas escape the danger of stray and reckless gunfire from the Russian army itself, but more importantly, it has torn open large gaps in the sky, creating absolutely safe air corridors for Ukraine's subsequent airstrike operations. President Volodymyr Zelensky later declared that this was a completely appropriate response and justice for what the capital Kyiv had to endure. He also said Russia suffered further losses, including the destruction of a key strategic information and communication system. 2 U.S. and a large transport ship loaded with ammunition waiting to resupply the front line were also sunk and destroyed. A sea of fire engulfed the targets. Russia has demonstrated a new geopolitical reality. Ukraine is no longer in a passive defensive position. Kyiv's unmanned aircraft have penetrated more than 1,000 kilometers deep into enemy air defenses, launching simultaneous strikes on a series of complex targets. The Kremlin is facing a major logistical nightmare as Ukraine has mastered large-scale swarm warfare technology, even surpassing Russia's bombing frequency. Statistics show a historic turning point, as Ukraine once surpassed Russia in the skies by launching more than 800 drones in a single month, outnumbering the enemy. On average, 237 long-range drones struck targets deep inside Russia and the occupied territories in a short period of time. But numbers aren't everything. The weapon that's truly changing the game is the terrifying destructive power and the remarkable technological evolution of the new generation of drones. According to United 24, Ukraine's production capacity has reached an impressive figure of about 200 long-range drones per day, They possess a diverse arsenal, ranging from sophisticated reconnaissance models to unique, one-of-a-kind beasts. The brutal combination of overwhelming numbers and destructive power has directly turned Ryazan into a wasteland. Even more concerning for Moscow, the situation will only get worse as Kyiv continues to expand its military alliances. Ukraine's announcement of a strategic cooperation agreement with Germany to jointly produce new-generation drones, aiming for a strike range of up to 1,500 kilometers, is a strong message sent to the Kremlin. Ryazan is just the beginning of a fiery new chapter in history. This counteroffensive has revealed two opposite combat doctrines on both sides. Meanwhile, Moscow continuously chose to terrorize civilians in the rear by bombing residential areas, causing more than 15,578 deaths and 43,352 injuries, according to data verified by the United Nations Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. A number that in reality could be much more horrifying than that. Ukraine, on the other hand, chose a completely different path by focusing all its firepower on Russia's industrial centers and energy lifelines. Although it is impossible to avoid unintended losses due to Russia's air defense systems intercepting the wrong targets, Ukraine's ultimate goal remains to paralyze the Kremlin's war machine. This clever move helps Ukraine maintain the moral high ground on the international stage, breaking all efforts of Russia's propaganda machine to portray them as terrorists. The economic punishment through firepower is reaching its peak as Ukraine is determined to cut off Russia's oil flow. Previously, the General Staff of the Ukrainian Army confirmed that the bombing raids had struck the Yaroslavsky oil refinery in the city of Yaroslavl, completely destroying the primary crude oil distillation unit, which is the core facility. Another major fire also broke out and destroyed the Astrakhansky gas processing plant in Astrakhan, while the strategic Taman seaport in the Krasnodar region was also blocked by firepower to cut off Russia's fuel export routes to international markets. These fierce attacks have directly choked off the tax revenue that the Kremlin uses to fund its military campaign. A report from Reuters pointed out that Russia's crude oil production has dropped sharply by up to 460,000 barrels per day compared to the same period last year. Russia's energy industry has fallen back to its lowest level since 2009, according to the New Voice of Ukraine. At the same time, the volume of maritime exports from Russia's key Baltic seaports also dropped by 31%. When the economic lifeline is tightened, the Kremlin's war machine will inevitably fall into a state of collapse. The Battle of Ryazan is a strong answer that every crime will have to pay with irreversible losses. In your opinion, is Ukraine's strategy of focusing attacks on oil refineries deep inside Russia enough to completely break Russia's ability to sustain the war?